The New York Sirens have acquired forward Denisa Krizova from the Minnesota Frost for defender Jincy Roese, the lone trade on trade deadline day 2026 in the PWHL. Let's talk about it. The Frost are back-to-back champions and are basically a playoff lock right now, so let's begin on that side of things. Why are they trading out Denisa Krizova, who they reacquired just before the season, for a defender in Jincy Roese? Well, let's begin. Let's talk about Krizova to begin. They lost her in the expansion process, reacquired her just before the start of the season, sending out Anna Sagetti, a draft pick from 2025, to the Vancouver Golden Knights to bring back Krizova. And this season, while she's been a useful player, she hasn't quite been as effective as she had been the previous 2 years. Just the one goal on the season, 5 points in total. In her career, she has 8 goals and 20 points in 77 games. And recently, with quite literally the most recent game in Kendall Coyne Schofield coming back to the lineup, was bumped down to the fourth line. And the writing was a little bit on the wall that was probably going to be her role the rest of the season, and was probably going to be a very good fourth liner if that was the case. Whereas the previous 2 seasons, she was a bit more of that third line forward that was on a bit more of their shutdown unit. So sending out a forward there and bringing in defensive help, I think makes a ton of sense for the Minnesota side of things. You look at their defense all season long, and while it was a pretty competent group, I think a group that excelled more than maybe at least I was expecting coming into the season, with the evolution of May Batherson into one of the better offensive defenders so far this season. Kendall Cooper playing top pairing minutes for like the first half of the season and really excelling in that role despite being a rookie. You look at all of that, and yet there was a lack of left-handed defenders on the roster. You had 3 technically, with Lee Steckline there, May Batherson, and then Madison Bizzall making the team out of camp. But Bizzall is that like 7th defender, can chip in on a third pairing if you really need her to, but is better suited as that 7th or extra defender. Not the kind of player that you probably are wanting to play like 15, 16 minutes, potentially on a third pairing come playoff time. And the other side of it was, if she wasn't in the lineup, well, then you're running 4 righties, with Brooke Becker stepping in, usually on the left-hand side on that third pairing, and then having Natalie Buckbinder, having Kendall Cooper, and having Sydney Morin as your kind of 3 mainstays on the right side. So what this trade does is it really gives Minnesota a clear top 6 on the back end. You have 3 lefties that are clearly going to be in the lineup, and you have 3 righties that are clearly going to be in the lineup. It makes it a lot easier for a former defenseman and Ken Klee as the head coach to have 3 set pairings that you can trust all throughout the lineup. And I think you have the forward depth to supplement that loss. You look at Jincy Roese in the first 2 seasons of the PWHL, she was basically playing first pairing minutes, was playing over 21 minutes, averaging that with the Ottawa Charge. She got hurt late last season, didn't play in the playoffs, so we didn't really get to see what her role would have been like as kind of Zoe Boyd stepped up into a bit of that void. But this season in New York, she hasn't played that role. She's been playing under 15 minutes most of the season due to some games early in the season where she played a bit more of that 20-plus minute role. She's averaging just over 15 minutes this season, but has largely been a third pairing defender this season. And it's actually resulted in some better results for her, where the previous 2 seasons, I think maybe the phrase or the word I would use is maybe overexposed a little bit at the top of the lineup in Ottawa, where negative goal differential at 5-on-5, even though she was involved offensively and a good passer and some things like that, the defensive side of the game is a bit lacking. So facing top competition like that, not the best fit for somebody like Jincy Roese, but with a bit more defensive depth, and certainly had that in New York with her playing third pairing behind a handful of players that are kind of similar player types, and now arriving in Minnesota where you have, again, a lot of defensive depth there. I think it's a better fit for her to play kind of 4, 5, 6 in terms of the defending depth chart, that kind of minutes. And I would play her on a third pairing, and I think she can excel in that role. And what we've seen this season is, for the first time in her PWHL career, she has a positive 5-on-5 goal differential. It's barely there, but she's up 10-9 in her 5-on-5 minutes with the New York Sirens this season. So she goes to a Minnesota team that has a very good defensive structure, that pushes the puck up the ice, is very good offensively. And I think there's a clear fit for her on that left side to balance out the lefty-righty split. pushes Brooke Becker down into a better position, pushes Madison Bizzall down into a better position in terms of being those extra defenders versus being players that are playing consistent roles in your lineup. And now I think it really gives Minnesota very intriguing defensive depth. When you think about the defensive pairings, the way that I think they'll break down is Steckline, Buckbinder. That's been the pairing on the top pairing all season long. I would expect that to continue. Buckbinder's day to day right now with an upper body injury. Given that designation, I wouldn't expect her to be somebody that is out long term, like into the playoffs and some things like that. So you got that top pairing that has been there basically all season. I think you have that younger offensive pairing of Batherson and Cooper that have played so well together all season long. And then you have Jincy Roese step alongside Sydney Morin, where you have that top pairing of Steckline and Buckbinder. But then you basically have two second pairings where Rose and Morin can step up and be a bit more of a veteran group versus a couple of younger players in Batherson and Cooper. And then if you need Rose to step up later in a game, if you're pushing offensively, she can easily step up alongside Lee Steckline even and play top pairing minutes down the stretch as you're trying to push for some offense. I really like the fit here. You look at the defensive group and it's like you've got the two defensive defenders in Steckline and Buckbinder there, and then the rest are either offensive minded or kind of two-way. So I do wonder if they consider splitting up the Steckline Buckbinder pairing just to have a bit more balance throughout the lineup. But I like the idea of a Rose Morin pairing. That's a pairing that you can put out for some offensive zone shifts. I think Kendall Cooper has proven herself to at least be a trustworthy defender so far in the league. And then Mae Batherson has again proven to be somebody that can put up some points so far this season. So you take all of that into account, and I think it's a really quality pickup where you subtract from an area of strength where Krizova looked like she was going to be playing fourth line minutes the rest of the season, with Elizabeth Jaguar stepping up from the reserve list to the forward group, and looks like she might even be playing top 6 minutes the rest of the season, or at least listed in the top 6 there. And you have some players there that you trust in fourth line roles. Like they clearly trust Peyton Anderson. And if she hadn't been as solid as she had been on the fourth line, then maybe they aren't as inclined to trade a veteran like Krizova to improve on a position of need like defense this season. So when you look at trades, there's always a reason that a team is making a trade like this. And I think somebody like Peyton Anderson proving herself in a fourth line role made somebody like Krizova a bit more of a trade candidate in this lineup to upgrade at, I think, a bit more of a position of need on defense, where we've seen over the past 2 years, the Frost have been able to score in the playoffs at 5-on-5, and I think that's the biggest reason why they're back-to-back Walter Cup champions. But the other big reason why is their defensive strength and their ability to roll out every pairing and a bunch of great defenders and get great results there, being able to bring the puck from the defensive zone, push it forward, and transition up the ice to transition to offense and transition well. And I think somebody like Jincy Roese, I think that's the area of her game where she excels most, where she's able to push the puck up the ice in a positive direction, is able to factor in offensively. Like you look at her stats, it's 25 points in 73 career games, 22 career points. That's production that's a little bit better than players that are probably higher regarded than her, like Savannah Harmon. And that's more points than Callie Flanagan and more points than defensive-minded defenders like Lee Steckline and Jocelyn the Rock and stuff. But her production is there in line with players that I would put in a similar tier as her. And with 6 assists this year in a lesser role, like I think she has the ability to excel in that lesser role if she's not being forced into like a top pairing minutes. I don't think that's the way to use her. I think she is best suited at this point in her career in kind of that third line sheltered role where she can maybe pick some offense and do that well. And I think she's set up to do that well on the Minnesota back end. So let's flip gears to the New York side of things. So why is New York trading a player that could excel in a third pairing role and kind of has done that a little bit this season? Well, New York basically had no forwards at this point due to injuries and some things like that, and already maybe having a bit less offensive depth in terms of having a lot of rookies in the lineup there. It addresses an area of need and takes away from a strength where New York had a lot of defenders. And I think the big thing is a lot of defenders that kind of do similar things to what Jincy Roese does, where you look at Micah Zandy-Hart and you look at Jamie Bourbonnais and you look at Maya Nyland Pearson and you look at even Allison Simpson there. To a lesser extent, Lauren Bernard even. Those are all kind of puck-moving defenders who are good in the offensive zone, good to decent defensively, I think, depending on who you pick out of that bunch. And Roese was kind of a player that was in line with a lot of that. And so when you think about that side of things, well, you have a couple defenders there at the bottom of your lineup that you probably trust to play third pairing minutes, at least in place of Roese. You would probably play Roese above them as they were this season. But in terms of trading out a player to address an area of need, certainly somebody that you would look to utilize as a trade chip there. And I think that's what they did here by getting Denisa Krizova, where New York so desperately needed another forward of note, where Colton Kova is going to come back, but Taylor Girard's out for the season. And you look at that forward group, and you've gotten some good results out of rookies, but man, you could really use another veteran in that lineup. And I think about the compete level that Krizova brings, fits that system very well. When you look at, I think, the success that somebody like Maddie Wheeler has had this season as a rookie, the compete level that she plays with, I think that's kind of what somebody like Krizova can bring, and can bring to a line with a Colton Kova and an O'Neill, or can bring to a line alongside a Sarah Fillier, or can be a bit more of that shutdown player lower in the lineup. Her results, again, haven't necessarily been as great this season, but I don't think you're bringing in Krizova to score some goals. I think you're bringing her in to be that competitive player that can get in on the forecheck, that can get some pucks loose, maybe can pick up a couple more assists the rest of the season, depending on who she's playing with. She's a really useful player in this league. There's a reason why Vancouver picked her up in the expansion process. There's a reason why she's been on 2 Walter Cup winning teams. There's a reason why that Walter Cup winning team went out and traded for her again. She's a useful player that I think coaches really like, and I think she's going to be a valuable piece picked up by Greg Fargo and that coaching staff here the rest of the season as New York looks to push for a playoff spot. Yes, they've been bad the past month. They have 1 win in their last 10 games, but they're still in the mix there. They're at 27 points. They're 5 or 6 points out of a playoff spot now after Ottawa's win most recently here. So look, it's tough to make up that ground, but it's not impossible, especially when you think about the games that they have the rest of the season. So for me, looking at, again, moving out Jincy Roese, why do you do it? Well, you have some offensive defenders already in that lineup. And I think most importantly, you have Dale Ross right there to step into the top 6, where Ross, really intriguing draft pick last summer as a player that was coming off of a torn ACL, or it had just had ACL surgery, but was regarded as one of the toughest players to play against in the entire draft class, a hard defender to play against. Activated midseason after recovering from her ACL surgery, hasn't played a ton just because of, again, that defensive depth and kind of trying to find her role. But with Roese now out of the picture, there's a clear spot for her in that top 6. I'd expect her to play a regular shift now on the third pairing alongside Lauren Bernard. New York, they've lacked reserve players. That's just kind of the reality of being a team based in that area. But the reserve players they do have, Nicole Valario and Olivia Knowles, both defenders. So it's not like you're moving at defensive depth for a forward and are now lacking on defensive depth. You certainly have your top 4 locked in place, which is basically played together all season long. And now you have Dale Ross. Okay, now it's your time to step up into the top 6 and be that defensive player that we need, and to help us out there and supplement on defense while upgrading in a notable way at forward. And I say in a notable way because you look at kind of the players that have been playing bottom 6 minutes for the New York Sirens, and it's a lot of players that haven't had great results or aren't going to produce really great results in this league, where somebody like an Emmy Fecteau can be a valuable 4th liner for you, but isn't going to really be able to play top 9 minutes in the way that somebody like Denisa Krizova has done in the past and can do coming into this New York team. Her fit on this roster is very intriguing. I actually wonder if she's going to slide into the second line and potentially play when Colton Kova's back with her Czech teammate, Kristina Koltenkova. They didn't play at the Olympics on the same line together. They played slightly different roles. But I wonder if that's a combination that that the New York Sirens could look to, and maybe have Kristen O'Neill as the center there, or maybe have her on a third line and pair her up with a couple of kind of compete level players in like an El Harchi and a Maddie Wheeler, and have that kind of hard to play against third line that a team like New York has kind of lacked, where you've had some competitive players in the bottom 6, but players that haven't really produced great results. And I think you've got some good results out of rookies there. I mentioned Maddie Wheeler, who's really impressed me this season. Anna Bargman scored some goals. But I think for New York to turn things around here, needed one more competitive forward, especially with the injuries, with Taylor Girard out of the lineup, needed a forward to replace her there. And I think they kind of did that here in this trade to bring in Krizova. Again, not a player that's going to score you a bunch of goals or anything like that, but a very competitive player, can pinch in on the penalty kill and some things like that. And overall, like, you look at the trade, and for Minnesota, fills a need on defense, takes away from an area of strength at forward. You had some forwards that you could sacrifice giving up. And on New York side of things, desperately needed a forward. If you could add it at this deadline, could manage losing a defender. So I think this is a trade that works very well for both of these teams here. It's a trade that very rare you kind of see this. B plus for both teams for me here if you're giving out trade grades. I love the fit of Krizova with this New York team. Again, they needed a competitive player like that, give some juice to this offensive group, and brings that Walter Cup experience that a team like this could maybe need with a bunch of rookies there. Brings that playoff experience, brings that winning pedigree. Those are some things that kind of matter. And moving out Jincy Roese, again, I don't think detracts from the roster because you have some players that can step up in that role. And I think Roese is a much better fit on this Minnesota team where you have that even 3-3 split on the back end, lefties and righties. And you have somebody like a Peyton Anderson that can step into the fourth line and play that role consistently now the rest of the season. So again, I really like this trade for both teams. I think it helps both teams become better. And I think you look the rest of the season and into the playoffs for a team like Minnesota, who is basically guaranteed to be a playoff team right now, just waiting for official word for them to clinch after one or two more results. You love the fit of Jincy Roese stepping into that lineup and not necessarily having to play a Madison Bizzle or a Brooke Becker 12 to 13 minutes or overplaying her top four. Really gives you the ability to play basically every pairing 18 minutes or more and kind of divvying up the rest of the minutes from there. Obviously, the top pairing is going to play more than that, but I think you have two second pairings there with the Cooper pairing potentially with Batherson and then Roese with Morin, where depending on who's playing well that game or what you want from those roles or whatever, I think you can get good results out of both of those pairings. So again, I really like this trade for both teams. Bit of a unique scenario where Krizova traded twice this season. I believe she's the first player traded twice in PWHL history. So a bit of a tough one for Krizova there, where was going to play in Vancouver, moved all their stuff to Vancouver, has to move everything back to Minnesota, and now is moving everything out to New York. That's a tough season for somebody like Krizova, but I think she's a valuable player, and clearly there's at least 3 teams in the league that value her enough to try and bring her in, and Minnesota there, Vancouver, who ended up moving her out for a player that they had a lot of familiarity with in Segedi there. And then New York bringing her in for this stretch run. So one trade here on PWHL trade deadline day. Again, I think it's very awkward to make trades at this point in the league's history with the inability to trade draft picks right now. I'm very hopeful that after this next round of expansion that we're finally able to trade draft picks in season, because I think that makes things a lot more intriguing for teams potentially selling at the deadline or even out some value in some trades. But yeah, one trade today. Jincy Roese out of New York to Minnesota for Denisa Krizova. Let me know what you thought about this trade in the comments here or in the replies, depending on where you're watching this. It's a trade that I liked quite a bit for both of these teams, and I think fits a need for both of these teams, and I think helps both of these teams become a better team down the stretch and potentially into the playoffs for both of these teams. So thanks for checking this out, and we'll chat again soon, probably just before the playoffs begin or right around the playoffs start. Chatting some more PWHL. So again, thanks for checking it out. Subscribe, follow wherever you're on, and I'll catch you next time.